So in this video, I wanted to show an example of what I was talking about for a statistics for a player, and I'm really not trying to show you exactly how to do it. I want you guys to work on it a little bit on your own. So I'm just going to show you a piece of it. So you'll notice I log in, and this is for the batter stat manager. So this is just for people that bat, but it would be similar for the other one. So if you click on players and you click on a player like Tyler, it will take you into a new folder called stat with the index. Okay, now this is just a view, so you don't need to like add, edit, or delete. You just need to have the index file. So when you click on it for batting, these are the ones that you need. You need the batting average, on base percentage, slugging percentage, runs batted in, and hits. Okay, and that's all pretty in the assignments. You could tell what it is. Okay, so what you do is you add a stat class. Okay, now there's no database table for this, so you don't have the table and the columns at the top, but we do extend the database object so we can use the functionality of that database object. Okay, like this return static by SQL. What you do need to do is in your SQL statement, whatever you call it. So I say select player ID as batting average. Okay, from player where player ID is equal to player ID, and that player ID is being passed from the batting average into here. Okay, whatever that player ID is as BA, you need to also declare it at the top here. It won't work if you don't declare it. So we call this batting average. You can call it batting average. You can type it out, batting average, right here. So you'll need to build out one of these, okay, for this is your static public method. So you'll make a bunch of these methods or functions and write your SQL statement accordingly. And that's what will be passed back. Whatever is in this will be repassed back into that. Now let's look at see how we actually use that in our stat on our stat page. So you'll notice we have a stat folder, and in there is just an index. Well, in the index, notice at the top we do two gets. Well, it looks like one get. We do player ID. And this is where we're getting the player ID, okay? And what does that mean? That means we're getting that player ID from the URL, okay? So you'll notice on player, on the index page, down here where it's the person here, we are, when you click on the player's first and last name, okay? Let me see if I can't make that so you guys can see just a little bit better. Okay, bring it over just a little bit. Okay, so when you the reference for it is stat index, and then right here this question mark player ID equal to, and we're passing in the player ID. So when you go to click on it, look down at the very bottom in this URL down there. It says what it is. It says player ID equals 1. That's how you pass in. And then let's click on it. Notice up here, player ID equals 1. That, when you use that get, it comes up here, grabs player ID, and it knows that it's player ID number 1. Okay, so let's go back and look back at the stat page. After we get the player ID, then we're going to find the player. So on player, we have one called find player. And what are we going to do with that? Well, we're going to just say, what's the player's name and first name and last name? Okay, that's all we want to do. What player are we talking about? Okay, so we want to be able to get their first name and last name, and we're going to get that out of the player database. So up in player, if you go up to player, we wrote a function called find player. Okay, so static public function find player, and we pass in the ID. Technically, if you look at this SQL statement, it could be a lot easier. I could say select all from player where the player ID is equal to the ID we just passed in, and return me back everything you find. And then I could use it as when we look back at that other page, I'm using first name and I'm using last name. That's pretty easy. Okay, so because it's coming back as an array, because this is an array, I have to use a for each loop. Okay, and then I go players as player, and then I echo out the player name. Okay, now when I get done with all that, I set up my table. Okay, and then right before, now this is not a table that's going to have to loop through and make a bunch of rows. This is just a one table. So I technically don't even need a table. I could just say, hey, I'll put this and put this in however I want to put it in. But I decided, hey, put it in a table. These will be the this will be the header, and then down here the answers will be in the answers. So this is how I actually did it. So I said batting averages is equal to stat. So I'm calling the class colon, and I'm calling the function. I'm passing in the player ID. Okay, so this player ID is what I got up here is player ID. Okay, so I pass in the player ID to that function batting average. Okay, that batting average is not the right SQL statement, but you would write an SQL statement that says do a count and whatever the formula is. Batting average is like hits divided by how many times they've been on base or how many at bats. So you would just count that player IDs, how many of those they've had, and you would count how many hits they've had and divide that, and that would be right here. So you can return two things. You could return the count of hits, and you can return the count of batting average. And then down here, you could set a couple variables like batting average is equal to BA, or you would say like hits is equal to batting average equals hits, and then just divide those two to get your answer for batting average. So this is how what it should look like. Okay, so you would say batting average is, which is an array, is equal to whatever's coming out of this function. And this function, batting average, is over here on stat. So if I click on stat, down here is batting average, static public function. And this is not the right SQL statement for it. You can write your own SQL statement for this. And that's what I'm trying to say is this is how it works. You would return and just use this as your format. So copy and paste that to do the next one. Pass in ID. This ID is the same ID that's being used here, and it's the player ID that we passed in when we called that function. The only thing is, if you put it, like I said before, if it's in the select statement, this variable, that's what it's going to be returned as, BA is going to be returned as, needs to be declared up here. Okay? And none of these other variables are being used, so I technically don't need them right now, but I was kind of planning ahead and seeing what I would need for that. Hopefully this will get you on the right track. We'll go over it again on Monday in class, but that's how I would get started with this. So that's just the stats. So you have the stat page, and obviously you'd have like maybe one more row here, and then you'd do that again. You have 5 different stats to come up with. So you'd have to figure out 5 different functions or SQL statements to get the information that you would need. Now, some of these are duplicate, so you don't need you can do the different things without having to write an SQL statement for each one. Say you figure out all of the ones that you need. Say slugging percentage is almost the same as batting average, or runs batting in is just a straight query. You don't have to do a function for it. So. And the same with hits. So if you figured out hits would help with slugging percentage, would help with on-base percentage, would help with batting average. So maybe getting that one's the first one you do. And you can use those other places. And then when you do batting average, you only need to say, well, how many at-bats have I had? And then divide that by your hits. So this is the same principle that you would use for pitching also. This is how if you were to, there's probably 1,000 ways to do this, and this is just one way to do it, but that's how I would do it for my index page, and that's what it would look like that's what the object would look like. Again, you have to initialize it, so make sure you go into your initialize and add the stat class on your initialize page. Hope this helps.